Sweet. All right, so my name is John David Dalton. I am a PM on Edge for web apps and frameworks, primarily on the frameworks. I also do a lot of open source. I'm the creator of Lodash, which if you build apps, you probably know it's a utility library. But today I'm going to be talking about ES modules in Node. So ES modules are, let's see. Okay, so before I begin on that, you can follow along on a blog post. If you go to Twitter/JDalton, it's my pinned tweet. There's a very thorough blog post on this thing I'm talking about, which is more than like 10 minutes worth or 5 minutes worth that I can get into. Cool. So ES modules, or ECMAScript modules, as the long name is, are here. They are in modern browsers. So Edge has them on by default now. Chrome has them on, Safari has them on. I think Firefox has them on with experimental flags, but give it like 2 weeks. It'll be on stable as well. So they're a new module system, and I'll begin with a common JS module, since we're talking about Node. So before the language had a module system, there was something else, something that existed before the standards process. And so this was a common JS. And so this is what common JS looked like. And so if you want, I can let's see if I can zoom in here. Nope, it's not going to let me zoom in. That's okay. Oh, maybe. Doesn't matter. You can see here that there is a require. And what that does is that actually loads synchronously a chunk of code. In this case, it's with an identifier called mod, which then does a resolution file system lookup to find a module called mod. What you can also do is you can export things. And in this case, it's an object, the exports object, where you just bolt on properties. So in this case, it's property A, property B, property C. But then you can also say, I want to replace the entire exports object with something else. And in this case, it's a function that does something. But there you're replacing object with a function. So then you can do something like require Lodash, and it will return a function that you can then instantiate for chaining. But then that also has lots of other methods bolted onto it. So there's that. Now look, this is ESM. So this is the standardized module system. Side by side, things look very similar but different. Where common JS required functions and objects to interact with the module system, ESM requires syntax. So you have the new import keyword that says import A from mod. And so in Node, it will still do the module resolution very similar to how common JS looks up a module, which means it looks for a file with an index, in this case .mjs or .js, and then we'll walk your directory up the directory tree. And then you can export, but instead of exporting like properties on an export object, you're actually exporting bindings, variable bindings, which means you can do some pretty cool things later on. And then at the very bottom, you can export a default, and in this case, it's going to be a function that does something. So ESM, or ECMAScript modules, has a concept for a special binding called default, which is that thing that is returned when you do something like import A from mod. A would be the default export. Okay, so that's common JS, that's ESM. ESM is now something that modern browsers will have, so now you don't have to rely on like AMD, which is asynchronous module definition, and you don't have to like bundle all your code up with Webpack. I would still do that, but you don't have to. Now we're getting them for Node, or are we? So here's how you do this in the browser. So you have to tell your code, or the browser, that you're running ECMAScript module code, or else it's going to think you're running jQuery from 2006. And the way to do that is this. Very easy. You say type equals module. Super easy. It's like, remember type like JavaScript? Now it's type module. Type module will tell it to do a parse goal of module, and that implies certain things. That implies like use strict. Use strict, if you use that, it's a strict mode directive. Modules are strict by default. There's also some syntaxy rules about where and when you can use async keywords. Everything there's no global scope. here. Everything is isolated inside the module context, which is great. So there's that. OK, so that's how you do it in the browser. Attribute type equals module. So how do you do it in Node? So now, Node land. The going proposed way is this, .mjs. So remember, like all those .javascript or .js files that you have, like throw all of them out. You gotta get rid of them. Everything is .mjs now. Like now the file extension becomes significant. Before, if you had like a PHP script that was generating your JavaScript, nope. I don't use PHP to do that, by the way, but it's an example. In this case, they did this. So how do you think the JavaScript community reacted to a new file extension? All right, let's see. This is how they reacted to the new file extension. All right, it's mayhem. OK, so there is a bright side to this. And so that is the strength of Node has always been in the community of userland packages like Lodash or React or jQuery. They all solve something that the platform is leaving to be desired, right? So that brings me to a new standard module loader. So this is standard ESM. I grabbed on to the standard namespace because it makes it feel like it's built in. So what are the benefits of using this new thing? So this new ESM loader, so this loader improves interrupt. So now you can use import, export. You can have live bindings. All of the stuff that you use Babel to do for ES6 module syntax, you can use this in Node 4+ without having to do Babel, without having to transpile your code. It also gives you better debugging. So if you are using modules now in the browser, you will be disappointed in the ability to debug your code. If you miss a specifier or you have a glitch in your import statement, it doesn't tell you the module that actually occurred in. It just says, hey, export A doesn't exist. And so it leaves it up to you to try to figure out where export A came from in like your hundreds of files. Standard ESM actually just does a nice thing and will actually say, hey, the error came from this file at this line number, and actually show you the snippet of code where the error occurred. Performance. So this is a point in time kind of thing. When I created Lodash, I created JavaScript library code that was faster than built-in methods. And a lot of people coming from other languages are kind of surprised by that vanilla JavaScript code can be faster than the things that are built into the language. But this is the case for modules too. So I've created something that is on par with native modules, and it's something that you can load in Node 4. The difference is like microseconds. It's pretty cool. One of the things that happens when you happen to enable experimental ESM modules in Node is you get right off the bat like a 1.3x performance hit across ESM code, across common JS code. Everything slows down. If you want to have your code that you use Babel to generate, and Babel creates these nice named exports where you can say import path from, or sorry, import join from the path module, import read file sync from FS, those things, right? If you want to do that, that's a 3x performance hit on your file system, or on your application out of the gate. And that's something that standard ESM also avoids. Super cool. So, interrupt. Let's get here. Babel. So, how many people are using Babel for their ES6 modules? All right, we have a few hands. Basically, if you're using Babel, I'm going to throw in TypeScript too because it has import, export. That code won't work in the new node that has ES module support because that code is actually common JS. And whenever you transpile that, and whenever native node loads that as an ES module, it loads it as just having a default export. So you can't do your named exports. You can't do something like import join, bracket join from path. That doesn't exist anymore. You can't say import bracket pluck from Lodash. That doesn't work. And all of your Babel code will be treated as common JS code, which kind of ruins the whole reason why you're doing it in the first place. So standard ESM has a compat mode that allows Babel code to just work. You can write ES6 code, you can write code that's written in Babel and transpiled to common.js, and it just works as if it is all ES6 code. Module scoped vars. So these little variable names, dir name and file name, are super handy, right? So hey, if you're using ES6 modules in Node, you don't get these. They don't exist anymore. There's no nice way for you to figure out what directory you're in and what file you're in. They are speccing out a meta property called import.meta.url. And that is a full URL, so file protocol, a URL encoded path, which means that you have to then have another library function to parse that out. And they haven't specced that out yet. So they give you this thing that's slower, harder to use, has no compatibility, and are just like expecting you to be super excited about it. The next thing is named exports. So I've hammered on this one a lot. This is because it's so natural. Babel has spoiled us with this, and it turns out that Babel was doing this before it was actually specced out, or before it was even an implementation design for Node. And it turned out that it was super handy. And adding support for this the way Node wants to add support for it requires things like a new directive. So remember use strict? There's been talk of like a use module. Well, now there's a proposal to have a use exports, where you actually have a string that contains the name of every one of the exports that you have later on in your code. So if you add a new export, you have to modify that string up top. They're talking about having Babel auto-generate this, but that also means that one, that 3x per fit. Two, if you're not using Babel, you're going to have to manually generate this thing on your own, and that's a lot of babysitting property names and magic strings. So you don't have to worry about this. With standard ESM, it's a property in your JSON, in your package.json. You say CJS true, and it just works. So Node 4+. So with standard ESM, you can get ES modules in Node 4, which is the current like LTS. I know it's going to be Node 6, but like at the time of releasing it, it was Node 4. It's going to keep changing. The thing is if you don't and you want to have built-in module use, and you want to share your code with another group, or like open source your project, or share it with another team even, that means you're going to have to wait till 2020, because that's when Node 10 is like the last LTS version, which is when they're going to get this. So April of 2018 is when they're getting this. So if you don't want to wait that long, then standard ESM might be something for you. Debugging. So code coverage. So you like ES modules. They're great. Guess what? Code coverage like Istanbul and NYC don't work. There's no way to integrate them yet. They haven't figured it out. So standard ESM, it just works. Istanbul works. Code coverage works. Hey, you like mocks? You want to mock your set timeouts. You want to mock your functions. Sign-in is a mocking library. That won't work either because ESM won't expose the module cache. That is something that is behind the scenes that a lot of these tools access to be able to manipulate what is actually loaded when you request a module. So they can do something like mock it out. Unit tests. So right now, without transpiling, unit testing frameworks don't support ES6. So they require Babel, which just means that if you're unit testing, it just adds this build time onto your unit test. You just want to get the thing to see if it passes or fails. And I was working on a project recently where it took like 10 to 15 minutes to build the JavaScript application. And that is a nightmare. And that's something that isn't supported out of the box with ES modules that are built in either. And so standard ESM, it works with Ava, it works with Jest, it works with Mocha. And Jest and Ava do some pretty crazy things behind the scenes. They spin up multiple threads, they mock out the entire module loader system, and I'm still able to get it to work. So super cool. All right, meaningful errors. So I mentioned before, and if you go to the project's website, which is in the blog post that I talked about earlier, there's a whole list of meaningful errors and things where it's easier to debug with the standard ESM loader. It shows you the code snippets, the line numbers. It shows you what file the import error occurred in. We even have a way for you to disable warnings and do things like there's something called temporal dead zones, which is where variables are undefined at time of initialization, but you only run into it when you have circular references, and we handle that too. So like the nitty-gritty spec stuff we handle too. So there's that. All right, performance. So it's on par with native. I said it's about a microseconds difference. This is on the secondary loads. The first time, it's got to do some stuff, right? So just ignore that first load, all right? After that first load, it's on par with native. That first load's just a little rough. By a little rough, I mean like milliseconds instead of microseconds. So that's a little rough. So no 1.7 per fit with the experimental modules. And then no 3.2. Oh, I rounded down. It's 3.2. It's more slow with this new directive. So you don't have to worry about that. And now I think it's time for demos. So cool. These demos are awesome. First of all, let me just show you some of these errors. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to see if this will work. I'm going off script now to see if I can click on something. Hey, what do you know? I can do it. Sweet. So here you can see that when there's an error, it says the requested module does not provide export named foo. But what is that requested module? Is it foo1? Is it foo2? Is it foo3? A, B, or C? We don't know. With standard ESM, it actually says, oh, it's the C module. So that's, I'm getting down there. The C module has it right there. It says does not provide the export name foo. That's something that is not quite available yet that we can do. And there's a whole list of them there from the website. So, and I'll show you that real quick. That's GitHub/standardthings/ESM. Standard things is because I like the Netflix show Stranger Things. And so this is standard things. And here you can see all the features. We support import, export. We support the import.meta, which is brand new. Dynamic imports work, live bindings, all of that stuff. So Node's going to have everything as a URL in the new ESM stuff. We support all that too. It was quite a lot of stuff. Okay, cool. So demos. All right. So part of the technical difficulties earlier was that my cursor is very slow. But I'm getting there. So just takes a second. Okay, first demo. This is super cool. You can see I've tried this before. First demo, this is very flashy, all right? Oh, whew. That right there is pretty cool, right? All right, so what is that doing, that little bit? Let's see. That is doing this. So first, it's instantiating the loader. So this is how you do that. It's require equals, and now you're replacing require with the new module loader. So standard ESM, you pass it your current module, and that is just so it knows, it gets its bearings. It knows what the current path is, what the current working directory is, all of that stuff. It figures all of that out. And then you just require your ESM file as if it was another CommonJS file. Now this is for the first load. This is something that's called the CommonJS bridge. This gets you into ESM code. And then you can see that if you recognize the dangling.default if you've worked with Babel before and you know that you have a .default export there. So there's that. So then let's look at the main.js. Okay, so you notice that, first of all, this is called main.js, not main.mjs. Haha. The standard ESM loader allows you to avoid the whole .mjs thing altogether. If you opt in to ESM.js, it will treat any JS file with an import or export or use module directive as a module, which turns out that most of the time when you're writing a ES module, you have an import, you have an export, because you're wanting to consume this thing. So it turns out it just works like 99.9% of the time. So you can see here, I'm doing something else that you can't do with built-in modules, which is using selecting a named export from the CommonJS module path. there too. So I'm able to grab join and then say hello world. So that's doing quite a lot in that little hello world. It's doing the named export, being able to import that, being able to use a .js file, and being able to load this in currently node 8, which is still unflagged before ES module support there. Okay, cool. So the next exciting demo is, here we go. Cool. So you may notice too that this directory is called Fury Road, and that is because this is adapted from a talk where I was developing the ESM loader from a place of frustration and anger. But I am a good citizen, and it is 100% node compliant with their node rules, which means by default, without configuration, it runs as node would want it to run. It requires .mjs. It runs by all of their rules. It doesn't do named exports. None of that stuff. All that stuff I showed you in that last demo, it's all off by default. You have to opt into those things. Cool. So the next bit here, exciting demo. 0.2. 0.2 is pretty cool. I know, like, believe me, it's cool. I mean, if live binding is cool, you're going to really like this. All right, cool. So here I'm loading and this is, again, like, normally you don't have to create the module loader and then load a file for each individual file. Usually you have a main entry point for your package or your module that loads everything else. This is just one-off scripts that I'm showing. So cool. So what we have here is importing value, reset, and add. Okay, so normally in CommonJS, these are properties that are on an object, right? If you take those properties and you modify those values now, they shouldn't change the bindings in this current module. But you can see here, I reset. I'm calling reset. What that's actually doing is changing the binding of value back to 0. And so that's changing the binding of value from live B, so from the B module. It's changing that variable in B to 0. And then I'm logging that out, so it says 0. Now I'm saying add 2, which is taking that variable from the B module and adding 2 to that. So 0 plus 2 is 2, and when it logs out, it's 2. And that's something that you can't do with CommonJS, because CommonJS is properties. And once you assign that property to a variable, it's no longer bound to the original value. So see, here it's creating these values and these variables, and they actually exist across module boundaries with live binding. Super cool. It's supported without any extra work with standard ESM, just like it would be inside of built-in native modules. So the next one is this one. All right, so this is, I use the REPL a lot, the node REPL, and I'll just load it right in. So this is node R, and then it's loading the standard ESM loader. So node R looks a lot like the experimental flags where you can go -- experimental modules, right? And that enables it in node 8+. But this one here enables it in the REPL. So now I can take node 8, so what is it, process version? So 8.7.0, no flags going off here. Now all of a sudden in the REPL, I can do this. Pop. Notice no syntax error. It didn't halt the REPL and go like, hey, you can't do that. Why is that? It's because it works. I can go A, I can go B, and it joins A and B, so that's the path method. It just works. The REPL just works with this, and that is the next bit. Cool. So let's take it to where I can relate this here. So let's switch to Windows 10. Ta-da! I'm going to see if this works. I'm pushing my luck with the mouse and all this other stuff, but we'll see. Here we go. Okay, sweet. Cool. So I've taken the node integration example from OpenFin, And what I'm doing here is just one line change, but it's an important line change. I'm taking const connect and the import that is normally a require call and turning it into an ES6 import here. And how I did that was going here, assigning, adding standard ESM as a dev dependency or a dependency, it doesn't matter which. Any kind of a pure dependency will work too. If your parent module has it as a dependency and your child module has the options object in there, it's still going to work. So here I'm enabling the, at the very bottom, CJS true. That allows me to do things like the named exports, which is what Babel, I could name the option Babel if people are more familiar with that. And then I'll show you what the actual stub looks like. This is what your compat layer becomes. It's just a tiny 2 or 3 line JavaScript file that then loads your main ESM code. And then after that, everything else is ESM, which means that in the future, when you want to get rid of this thing, why would you want to get rid of this thing? If you want to get rid of this thing, in the future, all you have to do is swap out the main entry point for your file. Change it from index.js inside your package.json to main.mjs, and that's all. That's your upgrade cost right there. You don't have to rename files. You don't have to deal with complex tooling. It would just be changing the package.json entry point. And that's it for my demos. Oh, I guess I should actually show it working. So here we go. I'm so close. See that cursor? It's almost to the, there we go. Sweet. Okay. So you can see kind of in the background, it's doing a service update. It's updating the time here, and the demo is updating there. And that's using the ES6 import syntax without any extra tooling, no Babel. It's just all real-time working right there. There it is. Cool. Thank you.